Joining us now is former Israeli government spokesperson and founder of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson Office, Eylon Levy. Eylon, thank you so much for your time. What does the American strike on Iran's nuclear program mean for the regime? Can they hold on to power?
Well, that's for the regime to decide now whether to escalate and attack the United States. If the regime that has been chanting death to America and death to Israel retaliates against the United States, I expect the US will respond and it will deal a critical blow to the regime. But that's not even the ultimatum that's on the table at the moment. President Trump is saying Iran must make peace now, and he's not going to settle for anything less. The regime that has impoverished its own people, enslaved the Middle East, spent $500 billion trying to build a nuclear weapon in order to destroy Israel, needs to surrender and admit it's game over. Otherwise, the United States says it's going to keep attacking and the regime will be in danger.
I'm curious, Eylon, about the wider Middle East. How are other Middle Eastern countries reacting to the developments of today? Talk us through that.
In private, I expect Arab leaders are celebrating that the United States has taken out the single biggest threat to the stability and security of the Middle East. No one wants an Iranian regime to get nuclear weapons. They know that would be a massive danger. And the United States has just stepped in and done everyone an absolute service. So I expect they're glad to see the Iranian regime being weakened. This is not the war Iran was expecting to fight. It filled the Middle East with proxy armies in order to destroy Israel and protect its nuclear facilities. And now the Iranian regime is completely alone.
Yeah, and just on that point about Iran's proxies around the Middle East, what does this mean for Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the proxies that Iran has been funding and training to rain terror down on Israel in the Middle East? Are they going to be significantly weakened because of these strikes against Iran?
Well, where's Hezbollah? The Iranian regime is asking Hezbollah to help defend it, and it's saying, nah, mate, we're not getting involved because Israel will clobber us. The Iranian regime expected that if anyone touched its nuclear program, it could activate its proxy armies with their tens of thousands of missiles to protect its quest for nuclear weapons. And now not even Hezbollah is willing to get involved and fight on the side of Iran because they realize it's game over. It's impossible to exaggerate how dramatic the shift in regional power has been since October 7th, when the Iranian regime launched its regional war against Israel on 7 fronts using its proxy armies. And now the United States destroying the Iranian nuclear program, and even its proxies won't risk fighting for Iran.
You're quite right. This has changed everything. So I want to bring it back to Australia for a minute, because our government has consistently been calling for diplomacy, dialogue. Have a listen to our Foreign Minister.
I emphasise there is an opportunity, given what President Trump has said. There is an opportunity over the next 2 weeks for de-escalation, dialogue and diplomacy. That is what we want to see, and that is what the world wants to see. Iran must come to the table and it must stop any nuclear weapons program.
Eylon, lovely sounding words, but had Israel followed our government's advice, Iran would still be on the precipice of developing a nuclear weapon and still pose an existential threat to Israel. Doesn't all of this prove that it's peace through strength, and that's the only way to deal with terrorist regimes?
Absolutely. If you are not prepared at the end of the day to use military force, then the Iranian regime knows that you can't threaten it and will race ahead towards nuclear weapons. The only reason the Iranian regime has to negotiate now is it knows that Israel and the US will continue pummeling it from the sky if it refuses to negotiate. Diplomacy failed. Just yesterday, the Europeans tried again. You know why it failed? Because they told the Iranians, we need you to prove that your intentions are peaceful. And the Iranians said, that's unrealistic.
That's exactly right. Well, how do you think...
are death to America and death to Israel. But now I hope they get the hint.
Yeah. How do you think Iran is going to respond to this strike?
Now I hope they get the hint and realize that diplomacy and peacefully dismantling their nuclear program is the only way.
The United Nations General Secretary put out a statement today. I really want to get your reaction to this. He said, "I'm gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today. This is a dangerous escalation," he said. "There's a growing risk this conflict could rapidly get out of control with catastrophic consequences." He said there's no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. The only hope is peace. This is typical, isn't it? Trump and Netanyahu just did the world a major service, and the United Nations is gravely alarmed.
Yeah, I think that shows what a joke the United Nations is. The same one that lets Iran chair important committees on, get this, human rights. Israel and the United States just did the world a massive service by knocking out the Iranian nuclear program. Diplomacy wasn't working. The Iranian regime was dragging out talks while it continued to race towards a nuclear bomb. Of highly enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs. The Iranian Supreme Leader tweeting just last month, "Israel is a cancer that must be eradicated," while trying to take foreign diplomats for suckers. And now is the time for the Iranian regime to accept that its strategy of trying to destroy Israel by destabilizing the Middle East and building nuclear weapons has failed. It's brought ruin to the Middle East, and now it's bringing ruin to the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime should change course and say, the war against Israel and the West is over. It should be made to sue for peace.
How realistic is that, though? Because the whole founding ideology of the Ayatollah is, as you said, death to America, death to Israel, the two great Satans of the world. So is there any realistic world in which they do decide suddenly, after being completely annihilated by Israel and the US, oh, actually, we're just going to give up now after 45 years of waging constant wars against the West? I mean, that would seem to me to be pretty unlikely.
Look, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people to decide, but ultimately the only path to peace is with a free and democratic Iran. And that's because the root of the conflict is that the Iranian regime says death to America and death to Israel. I mean, how do you compromise with that? Death to half of America? Death to everyone south of a certain line, under a certain age? Death to only the men, only the women? You can't compromise with that. The Iranian regime is a theocratic and fascist dictatorship driven by a religious desire to destroy the state of Israel. And ultimately, the Iranian regime might be made to surrender, but it's not going to change its stripes. And I can only hope the Iranian people take this opportunity to throw off the regime that has oppressed them for nearly 50 years, and we can have peace between Israel and Iran again, just like we did before the Islamic Revolution.
Eylon, I want to ask you about Benjamin Netanyahu. You've worked with him, haven't always agreed with him, but surely the developments of today, with the entire Middle East set to change, potentially for the better, surely this transforms Benjamin Netanyahu. How historic will he become as a world leader?
This is absolutely historic for Netanyahu. He has for decades been warning about the threat of an Iranian nuclear bomb against people who told him that it couldn't be stopped and that he didn't have the courage to act and wouldn't do it. And then at the moment of truth, he did, with the full support of the United States. The irony is, just 2 years ago, he had the worst failure of his premiership when the October 7th massacre erupted under his watch and we were invaded by Hamas. It was the worst failure of his premiership. And that has now led to the greatest success of his leadership, which is the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. And I imagine he is going to be looking beyond and saying, now is the time to transform the Middle East completely. Now is the time to move to a future of more peace and normalization accords with countries in the region that realize there is no point continuing to refuse to recognize Israel. Now is the time for peace. Now is the time to realize that Israel is part of the solution in the Middle East, not part of the problem. And the disaster of the October 7th massacre might lead to one of the best, most positive transformations in the Middle East in decades.
Just before the October 7 attacks, Saudi Arabia was on the cusp of normalizing ties with Israel. And I think there was some evidence that that was part of why Iran and Hamas chose to launch the October 7 attacks to thwart that peace process. Where do you think Saudi Arabia sits now, seeing a dismantled or nearly dismantled, severely weakened Iranian regime? Do you think this furthers the likelihood of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel?
The defeat of the Iranian regime is the single most important factor in peace and normalization in the region, because countries no longer have to look over their shoulder and fear an Iranian response. And because they look at Israel and say, boy, that's a country I want to be allies with. That is a powerful, prosperous, dynamic country that knows to stand up for itself and defend itself and is producing the most advanced defensive systems in the world. And it's our interest to be their friends. It's no wonder that Hamas tried to stop Israeli-Saudi peace by launching the October 7th war. And I expect when the dust settles, we're going to see rapid movement towards peace and normalization as the Middle East is freed from Iran's oppressive grip and countries around the region realize Israel is a country you want to be allies with, not enemies.